Yeah, Jim, thank you very, very much for carrying on critically my own thoughts and taking them a little bit further, a little bit more specific, and defining them analytically, that is ethically, now we have to use them in the comparative study of the religious developments in Africa, and see whether not some or other development plays havoc with even this definition, because the definition remains an instrument of analysis, and one single example contradicting it would fail. But I think you are, so far, I think you are correct, and I am happy with it. So, that's for the moment.
Yeah, I want to just agree absolutely that it's a utilitarian kind of approach. It's aimed at, and of course, what this could be interpreted as saying, well, we're now looking at kinds of religious expressions that aren't developing, aren't dynamic, aren't interacting with modernity, and so on. Of course they are. But still, I think, for example, when we were working in Zimbabwe, we saw that indigenous religions were still, with ancestor related, were dominated by ancestry, but at the same time, they could be influenced by the independent churches, by Christian mission churches, and so on. Yeah.
The terrain is extremely fluid.
Yes.
So, what is Mama Bata, for instance,
exactly,
in Ghana, and in the West Coast, everywhere, all over Africa. I think we will also witness a kind of in-betweens, which do not fit in this approach, and yet you would consider them to be part of this indigenous religion. It's also very close to what we call in the past folk religion within Christianity, Islam, and Buddhism, etc. So it still there still remains lots of comparative work and analytical work on the comparative data in order to see whether we even have to narrow or to change the defining characteristics. And these defining characteristics are indeed only utilitarian, constituted by us as instruments of analysis, and no more than that. But thank you very much for taking it on.
I saw that Ari want to comment.
Thank you both for this fascinating presentation. I have one question, two sub-questions actually. So this is a dichotomy between indigenous religion, which you've nicely defined, redefined, and transnational. Somehow, do you think that's a viable dichotomy, or do we need more terms besides that? Because I saw there are also some subdivision, but more specifically, I would wonder if this is not a rather normative, is another norm implied, so to speak. Because it seems to me, as an historian of Christian religion, that of course there must be a move from this indigenous religions to transnational religion, because we live in a globalized world, people are moving, there are influences, and so on. So it looks superficially to me that indigenous religion is basically the thing of the past, and religion, if such an analysis is moving to more transnational forms. So that's the normative character implied. Nothing wrong with normative as far as I'm concerned, but many people here in this room are very much concerned about norms. So I was wondering.
But why is it normative?
Well, because there is an old form of religion, and somehow we are moving to a new.
But the old form of religion.
Oh, you don't think there's normative? Okay, well, I'm looking for another term. So, but nevertheless, it's old. Once upon a time we had indigenous religion. Now we're moving. Somehow that's normative to me, but I don't want to.
But then I think you are overdoing the term normative.
Okay, I'm overdoing it. But nevertheless, I'll be moving from indigenous.
Historically, it's simply there.
I'm overdoing things. I like it. But nevertheless, this idea that
I really don't think it's an idea of like an evolution, moving to this, to that, normative in that sense. I think what we want to try to look at are what's really happening in societies and amongst these peoples. So for example, when I was out doing some field studies in Zimbabwe, and I was attending a rain ritual, and the spirit medium became possessed, and the chief was there, and so on, and we took our shoes off and whatever. There was the Lutheran church just right there. I mean, it was right there. And you can see there's the Lutheran church. Here are these people doing, and they go to the Lutheran church, and they do these rituals, and they participate in all of them. And so it's not a matter, I don't think it's a matter that they're now giving up their ancestors, although some Christian denominations did insist that they do, but it never happened. But it does mean that they're interacting. It's not. I don't want to give the impression that we're now looking at disappearing societies. What I'm trying to say is that we need to discuss, we need to talk about religious expressions that are rooted in their localities, and in some senses, in diaspora communities, I've argued that it's not just that they live in a locality. They might not live in the locality, but they still relate to it, and their primary association religiously is to this tradition to which they still have an overwhelming allegiance. So in this sense, I would say that it's not that one is moving into the other, but that it's transforming, and insofar as we can still relate the idea that this ancestral tradition is paramount and fundamental, but also maybe at the same time global. Another example are the Ifa diviners, that are now in America, and on the internet, and all this thing, doing these Ifa divinations, and they claim to be somehow indigenous. Well, whether they are or not is another matter. They're globalized indigeneity, you might say. So I do think that these are, this is a very good question, and I think it's the crux of the matter, that if we define indigenous in this restricted way, then are we just saying that we're looking at a thing which will soon be of the past? And I'm trying to say that isn't the case, but what we need to try to do is understand how these are transforming and relating their ancestral traditions in new ways. But we could talk about that, but I do think that's a very, probably the fundamental point.
Okay, thanks, Jim. Very nice, and of course, very well based, and solid roots. Kinship rules. Well, of course, there's anthropology 101. It is, and it's. I'm happy it got through religious studies. But it is, of course, it's true. Just one remark there. Not necessarily ancestors. That's because there are quite a few, and of course my own Kathiki have been one of them. Indigenous religions in which ancestors are not important, but doesn't matter. The kinship thing still holds.
Yes, that's
but
right.
The kinship idiom. That's the point. Based on the kinship idiom is still there, and it's still a small world. Even if there are no ancestors. So let's beware of the, say, almost stereotypical notion of African religions, indigenous religions, as ancestral-oriented religions. I think that's your Zimbabwe heritage shines through there.
That's true. That's absolutely true.
The second point is, of course, locality. Actually, don't use indigenous anymore. I simply call them now local religions. Which works fine for me, because there you have also locality plus kinship as one complex whole. So an indigenous has the drawback a little bit of notion of the question who's first, which in Africa is a problem you cannot solve, because everybody is first and everybody is last, etc. And it's the country of the continent of our origin anyway. Also, there is in some countries in Africa, Cameroon, for instance, a debate on indigenous meaning autochthony, and then autochthony giving special rights, etc., which we don't like at all. So, my own proposition actually is let's simply call them local religions. They're honoring both you and you.
I mean, I take that point, and the development of the term indigenous, as I try to outline in my book, is grown really, in my context, out of the British situation, particularly Scottish, where you had Andrew Walls developing this idea out of primal, and primal then what is primal, and so on, then you move it to indigenous, and then the other aspect of indigenous has the connection to the international political discussion, and this is precisely what you're saying, is an indigenous people, the first people, original people, and that's not how, maybe you can say that in some senses in Australia,
Yes.
but not.
It is normative,
Very normative.
Yeah.
So that's why simply local religion and based on kinship, and we're all happy.
For the time being.
For the time being.
And
We'll find our exceptions.
And
No worry.
25% of peoples in Africa are non-ancestral.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah, but you used the point that they were quasi
Yeah.
kinship, quasi ancestral.
It's based on kinship. That's
Yeah, kinship. Yeah. But these meta-empirical beings may have a similar function as ancestors have in ancestor-related societies.
Yeah. As for my icon material, you captivate me because even the gods there are family gods.
Oh yes.
Yeah.
And so everything is integrated into the kinship. But is it universal? Can it stand up?
Like any family, you do have some lousy members
Yes.
among them.
All right, okay, and then William.
Yeah, well, actually, I was going to ask questions like Ari was posing, and so I want just to continue that, and about also follow to that. I mean, why are we so? I think one of the problems I find indeed in the study of religions in Africa is indeed the fact that we get stuck to certain concepts and categories, and then we never get rid of them. And you gave a good example of that. Local religions may be a solution for now, but surely that one will also have to go in terms of inside of the global developments that we're dealing with. But you say, well, it's kinship based, yes, and it's also local based. But you see it actually that I would say that the distinction between indigenous religions as you define them and transnational religions, I mean it's sort of well, sort of merging almost. Yeah, because the Christian Africans and also, well, Muslim, Islam and Christianity, they also use kinship-based language, you see? I mean, they do exactly the same. And so in that sense, it's not, well, uniquely characteristic of indigenous religions. It's apparently a sort of idiom, what you call the kinship idiom, that maybe is sort of characteristic of religion in
I just say,
general.
I know just on that point though, I mean, if you are an African Christian or an African Muslim, and you still use kinship basis, nonetheless, I think that you are involved in a broader expansion. In other words, you can be converted. Whereas if I go to a village in Zimbabwe, I cannot claim that, you know, I mean, I could do it if I wanted, but it wouldn't be legitimate. I am not a member of that group. I'm their
But
ancestor.
you would become one after initiation.
Oh, yes.
You can be adopted.
I could be adopted, but they are not my ancestors. They would have to become my ancestors.
Yes,
That's the only way.
Yeah. But also the example that you gave in your comment to Ari about the definers here and so. I mean, since you explained that in religious terms, then I would say, well, one thing they're doing is indeed missionizing, because they're advertising like mad, and they try to get all of us into their sort of.
Sorry,
I mean, all these definers and these seers have the.
This globalized version.
Yeah, but wouldn't you see that as a form of missionizing?
Yes, that is, and that's why in an article I've just written, I've called these Ifa diviners not indigenous.
Well, here you see, so it's almost good reason to get rid of that.
But I think but the only reason I'm saying this is that too often, I mean, when you go to meetings, conferences, papers, and so on, people talk about indigenous religion, both terms. They think, oh, you know what you mean. They don't say what they mean. People just sort of have to intuit what they mean. And I think at least if I can say, this is what I mean, then we can discuss it.
Yes,
Then we can say,
absolutely.
yes, okay, well,
Absolutely.
this isn't fit, this ancestors aren't always applicable, this and that. Kinship
But
101 and so on.
I also mentioned normativeness,
Yeah.
and this to Jan and you, because you both use that term. And why do you use the term salvation? I mean, Jan, you have Jan as
I
one
was
of the
struggling with that
characteristics.
too, yeah.
Well, I didn't use salvation. Well,
Jan uses
Jan
it,
did,
yes, yeah.
but what I was,
So Jan, please.
salvific, he called
Because
it
you were a priest,
salvific.
yes.
But what I'm just saying is that again, it has to do with maximizing health and well-being and minimizing disruptions in health.
No, I understand all that,
Yeah,
of course,
yeah.
but my problem is with the concepts that we're using, and there are all sorts of connotations in there. That's salvation. If you talk about salvation here, and all sorts of bells start ringing in your head,
Yes.
and then we transfer that and impose that on the context of Africa. What could you do instead, Jan? You.
Well-being,
Yeah,
That's
okay.
right.
Well, do it.
well-being,
Yeah.
well,
But-
peace, prosperity,
But
well-being, whatever.
In defense of
All the good
desires,
things of
yeah.
life.
yeah, in defense of Jan,
All the good things of life.
what he's doing, he's writing this for an audience that is trying to understand what, and in Western terms or in Christian terms, or in certain traditions, the idea that salvation is a term which means being somehow redeemed from one's present condition, which is regarded as somehow unacceptable. And in that sense, you could say, if you're infected with illness or this disruption in your society, or you have these catastrophic events, then this is in a sense what they want to be delivered from.
Yeah, no, of course.
The term is a little bit loaded.
Yeah, I know
Exactly.
that.
And there's so many of
Yeah.
these.
But some of these terms which are loaded, you have to use them in order to get across.
That's right.
Yeah, I know.
That's okay.
Right. We'll take one last question from William and then we'll have lunch.
And I think it is a related question, because I wanted to ask something about a point that was just reiterated, where you said I couldn't go to Zimbabwe and just say these are my ancestors, and then said, well, I could, but it wouldn't be legitimate. And there are a lot of people who do exactly this, and most often they don't even bother to go to Zimbabwe to do it. They just stay in the Netherlands. I don't know much about African religion. I know more about Native American religions, and it often happens.
I know.
And then the question comes, do you still count that as indigenous religions, being indigenously religious? Probably not. But then it becomes more problematic when you look at young Native American people today who have not been brought up with their own traditions, but at some point in their life find them to be important anyway.
Yes.
And then get inspired by for example, the Pan-Indian movement.
Yes, that's right.
And
yeah.
they adopt ancestors, or they adopt gods. Is that still included in the definition? And if not, then what is the use of the definition?
Yeah. No, what you're talking about is very important because, as you know, in many parts of the world, the traditions were interrupted. I mean, I'm just working now on a project in Australia, the repatriation of indigenous knowledge, where the generation, the stolen generation, many people just completely lost their traditions, and now young people are going back to the person I'm looking at, T.G.H. Strelo, as an important contributor to the discussion of what is, in this sense, Aranda traditions. And I was out there in Alice Springs last September and talking to some of these people in repatriation, some younger people, and they were saying, yes, we're going back to Strelo to try to understand the meaning of these Churunga, these sacred objects, and their myths, their stories, their songs, because they'd lost them. Well, all I'm saying is by this operational definition, if you say that these people are going back to their traditions, even if it's not legitimate or authentic, or it's reconstructed or reinvented or whatever, they're going back and they're trying to identify their ancestral traditions, trying to reinterpret them for the contemporary time, and still living within the fact that they are a people within a particular location, then if my criteria are applicable, then yes, they would be considered indigenous religions, even if it is a recovery of what was lost. But it will never be a pure recovery. It will never be, and it will always be in modernity and so on.
But that's okay. But there's never a pure form anymore.
No, there isn't. No. So I mean, I would say.
Religions are constantly reinvented.
But this is what I mean by the traditions being transformed and changing and evolving with the whole globalized world, and whether we can still, as you say, talk about indigenous, make sure the local global relationships and that sort of thing, may be a far better paradigm than talking about indigenous, and I'm very much open to that. Yeah. I don't know if that speaks to it, you say, but for example,
it does. But what I don't yet completely understand why it would be more than a categorization, and where it becomes a heuristic device. Where does it become a tool for increasing our understanding?
well,
Because you hunt for exceptions.
yeah, yeah.
I think that's the main point.
Yeah.
It's a sort of
Falsification.
what you have in a definition is a sort of cognitive gravitation point,
Yeah.
and things, and then you can see the differences and the processes which lead to the difference. That's the heuristics.
Yeah, that's
So-
it.
And therefore the limited utility.
Yeah, that's right. And I don't think, I mean, I don't want to use it normatively, like, yes, you are, no, you're not.
No,
You're not that
that's not a heuristic.
Yeah, no, but something that says, yes, let's use this as a means to try to understand what's going on, basically. Yeah. That's heuristic.
Right. Thank you very much.
Yeah. Okay, thanks.
Now